everyone. My name is Brandon Romano. I'm the graduate intern in the Disability Resource Center at Southern Connecticut State University. And for today's panel, we are going to be talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the well-being and wellness surrounding the movement that is affecting people around the world. So in this panel today, I have a couple participants. I have Dr. Brooks once again. I have Ala, Black Lives Matter movement coordinator. I have Scott Esdale, who is the president of NAACP. I have graduate intern Rachel Ellis, who works at Southern, and I have graduate intern Kiana Smith as well with me. Say hi, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So, so to get this panel started, the first question is going to go to Ala, and the question is, what is the message from Black Lives Matter, and what is the purpose that Black Lives Matter is trying to accomplish?
You're muted.
I'm sorry, y'all. I love talking on mute apparently all the time. Follow me to Google Teams. So I would say the mission and vision behind Black Lives Matter New Haven itself is to galvanize, to expand people power, to begin to co-create with the community the solutions that we want and need, healing, just Black joy, and like undoing the myth of Black respectability politics and anti-Blackness within our own community, as well as in other folks' communities, but centering and focusing on healing within the Black and Brown community. What was the second question? What was the second part?
And what is your current objective of what's going on? Like, what are you doing to, push the movement forward and take action?
So we've been in existence for about 6 years now, and so it's been a slow and steady process of building community galvanization, really getting folks to see our messaging and look at the work that we're doing. We are, our foundation is based in community direct care support. So we have a lot of community, what I like to call give backs, which currently our most current one, which we're collecting donations for, is the hat and glove drive. Normally it's a coat, hat, and glove drive, but due to COVID, we're just shifting some of collecting used things, and we're just purchasing new hats, new gloves, and things like that. So our direct mission is always to stay connected to the hood, to be in the hood, to love on the hood, and to also go outside of the community and these organizing spaces that I'm most often in, and making sure that the work is grounded in actually what the community wants. Once a lot of us are in this work, we tend to begin to speak over the very populations of folks that we're seeking to work with. So we always stay grounded. This June, we just started our caucuses, which are small niche communities within the Black Lives Matter New Haven collectives. And we have a research collective, and they just did an amazing resolution to get SROs out of schools. We have a fundraising and reparations collective. We have a marketing collective. We have an artivism collective. We have a transformational justice collective. And so we just graduated our first cohort of folks through the Transformational Justice Academy. And we have a leadership development. We do a lot of leadership development work as well. So what that looks like right now is our caucuses and our collectives are to focus on the things that are most important to them. And so our collectives are made up of folks in the community of New Haven, but outside of New Haven as well. And these are not leadership it's only five of us for leadership, but these folks are also decision makers. They're also the folks who do a lot of idea creation, and they are the veins in our work that allows us to continue to plug into the city and galvanize. But again, I will say, if I haven't said it enough, our mission is systemic change and shift, as well as galvanizing power within the Black and Brown community.
Thank you for sharing that with us. So this next question is open up for everyone to answer, and it is, how is social justice connected with wellness and well-being?
Maybe I could jump in. This is Scott X. Esdale, the state president of the Connecticut NAACP. So first, thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate. I think what you're doing is wonderful, and the information that the sister just gave about the Black Lives Matter organization in New Haven was very, very inspiring. I think what we have to do is understand the history of Black Lives Matter. So there's a current history, but Black Lives Matter really goes back to the first time we stepped our feet on our soles of our feet on this at this particular country. We came in here as slaves, and we didn't matter at all, and we were brutally raped, brutally treated. We were robbed of our names, robbed of our religion. We had to work from can't see in the morning to can't see at night. And there was always advocates fighting for the betterment of our people and fighting for our lives to matter. It came to a point where the bloodiest war America was ever was the Civil War between the North and the South, fighting over the issue of slavery in America. And then after the North won the war, there was a Reconstruction period where they were striving to solve this issue of Black Lives Matter. And blacks became governors, blacks became U.S. congressmen, blacks have become state representatives, mayors of cities, and the KKK was created, and they went into the houses of power, the chambers of power, the Congress and Senate, grabbed those individuals that were representatives and burnt them at the stake, killed them, murdered them, raped their families, destroyed their families, and destroyed their property. Out of that, we created universities in the South, which are called HBCUs now, striving to get an education, pushing to make sure that we had the opportunity to learn, and making sure that our children mattered, our families mattered, and we mobilized and galvanized for success in this country. But once again, they killed us, they murdered us, they destroyed us, they raped our women and raped our children, and burned our universities down. And we started building Black Wall Streets and Black communities. And they once again they ravished those communities. And then in the early 1900s, we want to, well, I should say not early in the 1900s, but then Jim Crow came out and strived to push us back even more. And then the lynchings came about in the South, and there were Black people hanging in trees all over this country. And we're talking about well-being, right? We've always been fighting for a well-being and a peace of mind and a decent living without terrorists destroying our communities. So this has been a fight that we've fought for centuries. And I applaud the young people joining into the fight and pushing back. With our people have strived to push back ever since we've been in America. But the NAACP was founded in 1909 to stop the lynchings in the South, when politicians and law enforcement were walking around in suits during the day and wearing hoods at night and hanging our people, black men and black women and young people. And there was a Billie Holiday who was like the Beyonce of, she sang a song called Strange Fruit in the Trees, because law enforcement and political officials were hanging our people in the trees. And then after that, we fought against all of this stuff. And then in 1954, the NAACP, through Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston, did the Brown versus Board of Education case, where now we're able to go into universities like Southern Connecticut State University and make sure that our communities matter and also have an opportunity to get an education. But they fought against that. And young people had to go to class with the National Guard protecting them going to class. And then, fights all throughout the 60s, the 70s, the crack era, the AIDS epidemic, all these different epidemics have occurred, and this constant backlash every time we started advancing. And then Obama became president, and now there's a huge backlash now through law enforcement killing and walking away with no consequences with our people. And our people are continuing to fight. But I just want you guys to know that it's always been a fight for us to have a well-being and a healthy in America. But it's always been a fight. But we must continue to fight. And I'm glad that the young people are mobilizing and organizing and continuing this fight that our ancestors have been fighting for a long time. I know it was long-winded, but I just thought that the history needed to be taught. Hello?
I'd like to, yes, Scott X, you dropped the mic and then we was all silent. I would like to also offer, so a lot of the work that I do currently outside of just Black Lives Matter, is I do anti-racism work, right? And that looks like all different kinds of things all over the thing. There's like 5 different anti-racism trainings that I actually recommend that you go to, inclusive of mine. I focus on the socialization into isms. I focus on the consequences and reinforcements of genocide and what that looks like in the United States historically, as well as patriarchy, capitalism, racism, anti-Blackness, and all of those things. And so as Scott was sharing our historical context, which is very important because a lot of things currently like to move ahistorically and not remember the history of whatever it was always. So I am a lover of history, so I like that. But at the same time as the historical moments and points that Scott X alluded to, or even outright named, there were also and has also been a socialization into othering of other folks. I definitely suggest folks to read Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGroy. I also suggest folks read The Possessive Investment of Whiteness. And I also suggest folks to read, especially Black and Brown folks, to read Anarcho-Blackness. The act of being Black or Brown, it visibly, right, non-passively, even, in like the ways where like, you're light skinned or you're ambiguous. And so those are points, provide points of privilege for some folks. But always have we been othered, always have the world and policies, historical policies have always been created in order for everyone to think that Blackness in any points of the diaspora, whatever that looks like, is wrong. Even so much so that I'm 36 years old. When I was in Catholic school in New Haven, some of the best schools in New Haven, I still was learning about Blumenbach. I still learned about Negroid and Caucasoid and Asiatic, and also did not learn that those things were not true, that those things were made up, and that Blumenbach himself debunked his own theories years later. And so socialization looks like we'll find some of this stuff out, but won't find out the end, right? that some of us, when I do my workshops and we talk about that, folks over the age of 30 still have heard Blumenbach, still have heard Negroid, Asiatic in school, socialized into thinking that that is what is true, right, and exact. And so when we're talking about well-being and wellness for Black and Brown lives, if we add on the intersections of femininity or womanhood or queerness or dark skin, any of those other points of intersection couple on to points of oppression. So as intersectional as we all are, we're also that much oppressed. And so for Black Lives Matter, if any of y'all know me, follow me on social media, like I talk about finding the joy in everything that we do. It is anarchical for Black lives to exist, for us to be born, for us to do anything is an act of anarchy. And so sharing that with other Black folks, finding Black joy and not limiting it to what we're told capitalistically or patriarchally is what joy is. Sometimes Black joy is just making it through the next day. Sometimes Black joy is like I was doing earlier, dressed up in my Halloween costume, making promo videos for my job. So Black joy can be tied directly to Blackness, but it could also be me waking up the next day and being like, damn, like yesterday was really hard for my Black self and I made it. The ancestors and the Arisha Obatala saw to wake me up again today, to go into and to enter into more contracts with my community. And so wellness looks like healing for Black and Brown communities in a way that has been criminalized previously, still currently, if we add intersections of therapy or peer support and those things, those foundations have been steeped in racism and anti-Blackness. So more oftentimes, we have so many points of oppression that we don't know what wellness looks like and what well-being looks like. Some folks die never even leaving their state, never even having seen the beach, and they are born in California. So joy and wellness looks like undoing that and like reestablishing your boundaries and healing childhood wounds and wearing red, black, and green on Wednesday in, the whitest towns in New Haven, what your Black Lives Matter flag, is well-being and joy for me, healing.
Now, to couple on to the point that both Scott and Ala were bringing up, just the recognition of the history, because when we talk about well-being, the actual definition of well-being, looking at the Oxford Language Dictionary, is simple: the state of being comfortable, healthy, and happy. Now, given the history of people of color in this country, when has there been a chance to be comfortable, healthy, and happy?
I don't think
so. So when we talk about looking at well-being within the Black Lives Matter movement, that's essentially it. Like, look, can y'all just stop killing us? Let's just start like at basic. Let's just stop not killing people. When we talk about moving into a place of well-being, it's about being able to recognize each individual's life is just as important, just as valid as the next person. So just as Kiana wants to be able to be comfortable and happy and healthy, so does Rachel. So does Brandon. So does Diamond. So does Scott. Everybody wants those same things. And just because I'm working to make sure you have it doesn't necessarily mean you're working to make sure I don't have it. Or just because I'm making sure you're having it doesn't mean I'm taking away from myself. It doesn't take anything to treat somebody the way you want to be treated. And that seems to be at that core message of the Black Lives Matter movement. But when we look at the core foundation of this country, that actually runs anti to those foundational values within this country that we have not been able to actually root out. brought up, through history, we see it time and time and time again, from going back to 1619 all the way to 2022. I know it went beyond, but that's because we know that as of right now, the strides that we're making are not going to bring us to where we're trying to be in the next 2 years. We're talking about generational shifts, generational changes that will have to happen over time. And so, just as I was bringing up that point when we're looking at the intersections of people's lives and how even in the intersections, people are being stigmatized into a degree of this plus this plus this plus this, when it was already bad enough with just one identity. And then you're recognizing, well, you have multiple identities that all work together, and each of them are stigmatized differently. Each of them are just now being added onto you. So you're a woman. Well, women have their own level of oppression in this country. You're a black woman, so you have that black oppression, then you have that woman oppression. Oh, and you're lesbian, you're gay, you're trans, whatever the case may be, more and more and more and more and more. And so when we're talking about really just looking at aspects of well-being, again, can you be comfortable, healthy, and happy in your own skin, being who you authentically are? And that's part of that work that we're seeing Black Lives Matter movement organizations all over the country trying to put forward and trying to achieve. But at the same time, we're seeing that pushback day in and day out on every single level. And it is one of those things that definitely will result in aspects of vicarious trauma, which is why we're seeing people, again, trying to work towards that well-being, but at the same time, they're being traumatized daily within the work that they're trying to do, which is why we're talking about how important it is to be able to have these sorts of discussions, to be able to talk about this stuff, because you can't walk around carrying this stuff all the time. And that's what we're doing because we don't know who we can actually talk to about it.
And I also want to add on, because generational trauma keeps coming up too. And I think a lot of it is also repetitive trauma, because it's trauma. It's not stopping. Like, it's literally like every day Black and brown people are getting inundated with literally just like trauma nonstop from being killed by people who are supposed to protect us. And to say that's not really a well-being issue, or to insinuate that it's not important, it's just doing a disservice. And another thing that I would like to say too, I don't know if any of you all ever heard of the ACEs trauma report. I'm pretty sure Randolph has, but in the mental health field, it's called the Adverse Childhood Events Trauma. It's like a questionnaire that's filled out, and it goes through the different traumas. And a lot of Black and brown people go through these traumas, and it's normal and it's normalized. But when it's someone who's not Black and brown or white, it's not. It's seen as, oh my goodness, like drugs, for instance, or growing up with someone who was in a house doing drugs. It's seen as, oh, that's like really serious. Like, if he's white or she's white or they're white, they went through so much. But if it's like Black and brown, it's like, oh, that's their own problem. That's their own. They don't need any help with that. They can figure it out themselves. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of our students go through here at Southern. Not a lot, but a good amount. And one is enough to be considered a lot to me. So I say all that just to say that social justice is definitely a huge part of our well-being in general, Black and brown's well-being. If anything, it's important to acknowledge it rather than just dismiss it, because we're literally just making the problem worse, and we're only going to get louder. So yeah.
Can I ask a question? I'm not a psychology major, but my daughter is a psychology major. She just graduated from Hampton University, and I just had this conversation with her, and I just really wanted to get a good understanding of young people, because I hear a lot of this conversation around trauma, and I'm really glad that it's out there. But I have a question around it, and maybe you guys can help me with this. My question is that if we're trying to solve the trauma, right, and the chaos is still going on at the same time, how do you fix the trauma when the problem is still out there? Or is it kind of like the chicken and the egg type of philosophy? Because if you're fixing me and I got to go right back out there to get the trauma again, how do you fix the situation? It's kind of
So
like
that's, oh, I'm so sorry.
the police are still out there killing our people. So I know that when my son has to go to work or go wherever, I'm terrified with him in that car, right? So, you know, we're dealing with the trauma, but the police are still out there doing the same thing, killing our people. So you're trying to get people to have a mind of well-being and a mind of ease and a mind of tranquility, but at the same time, the war is going on. So how do you do both at the same time?
So I definitely agree with you. And it's super hard, but I think that the awareness to childhood trauma being one of the main culprits and pretty much bettering our community, because a lot of it too is within us, if I'm being completely honest. And a part of it, honestly, I'm gonna really address, I don't have the answer, right? A lot of this is theory and it's so hard to figure it out. And I think the hardest part of it is because we're still we're literally still going through it right now. And it's like, if I'm being honest,
building the plane while you're in the air, right? Or trying to drive the car and build it at the same time.
Yeah, it's so much going on in general. And I don't know, I really do want to hear what Allah has to say, because I'm kind of at loss for words, because as a young up and coming professional in mental health, that is something that is hard, because everyone is literally we're literally going through trauma every day. I can't even go on. I have friends and myself, I can't go on Instagram or anything because I keep seeing the same thing over and over. So even mental health professionals who are Black and brown are going through this, and it gets hard to help when you feel like you're moving with, kind of like a glass half empty. So yeah, I don't know if Allah wanted to chime in.
I feel y'all. So my one, you're not supposed to answer a question with a question, but my one question before I can answer the question or even begin to muse around the answers, because, what kind of traumas are we talking about? Some generational traumas that we receive, we can stop those. If Black and brown parents are not even Black and brown parents, most oftentimes our first traumatizers are our caregivers and our parents. Before we're able to be socialized into institutions, cultural or systemic, we are conditioned in our home. And so, like I said, most traumas and trauma responses or triggers or trauma reminders all stem back from how we are dealing with things at home. So before we can begin, and so one, that's that. Two, I'm ready to stop having the conversation about what are we going to do when stopping racism. That's never going to happen. We could take every white person, every rich Black person that then gave up and sold out. We could take them, send them to the moon, let them do everything they're doing, and we could just still be here and nothing will change. So it's not the ism. The ism was created a long time ago. We have been socialized and we now have conditioned tendencies. We now have trauma reminders and behaviors that stem from that. And so for Black and brown children are to be seen and not heard. Don't question my authority. These are things that we have been conditioned into due to slavery and enslavement, rather, because I'm trying to stop saying slavery and slaves and stuff like that. Due to enslavement, we now take that and raise our children. So we're raising a bunch of, my friends and I, we're all doing therapy now. And my friends, they be like, oh God, here she come with the healing stuff. And I'd be like, child, you better heal that mother wound. It doesn't matter if you have amazing moms. Black and brown folks are conditioned culturally to not listen to their children, to silence their children, to take the biggest things because we don't want the outside to know what's happening in our family. And so we'll deal with it and sweep the rug. And then, right, we're sending our 7 and 8 year olds into colonized institutions who are the perpetuators of that big behavior. And then we're expecting us to walk around being healed and okay and being able to deal with things. So I think that it starts not trying to combat racism, not trying to combat the outside forces, but combating patriarchy and anti-women and misogyny and anti-blackness and anti-queerness in yourselves and in your homes before you have children, with your children. Apologize to your children. Like I'm 36 years old. My mother, when she says sorry, I know that she really doesn't mean that she's sorry. She's being very fisty. I'm sorry that I raised you that way. No. So we have to humanize children, humanize us to be able to experience things differently. Then when we're talking about the traumatization of racism and patriarchy and anti-queerness and systemic traumatization, when we're able to not have a cognitive dissonance because I've been told my whole life that don't say anything to be seen and not heard, and now I'm 21 and now I'm supposed to say everything. There's no shift. There's no time for healing in that. So like if we raise little loudmouth, bad Black kids who questioned authority and gave them dictionaries and put them in pro-Black spaces, and then they're 18 and 17 and going into systems, they'll be able to be in the school and say, Miss, I know what you're saying, but and also historically, that wouldn't be a point of trauma. It would be a thing where they have been so built up and so much life has been breathed into these children that they can identify what's happening in front of them. They can name it for what it is. And then even if because we don't get to say what traumatizes us, like we could all be on a thing, see the same thing, and only 2 of us are traumatized, and everyone else is like, da, 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 da. But the chances of that traumatization and the enforcement that Black and brown kids or visibly queer kids or visibly trans kids who don't want to pass or are not passable, that their life matters when the world tells them something that's not true because that don't match up with everything they told. And even some like, every Black and brown parent, almost, unless you just totally subscribe to capitalism and like colorblindness, has the talk with their children. But if all before that, you breathe so much life into your children, when you talk to your children, they will be able to not have a cognitive dissonance because you prepared them. And so before we go and blame the isms for doing what they were supposed to do, and before we blame and practice anti-Blackness and Black respectability politics, let's just call it what it is. We have been socialized into anti-Blackness, no matter how pro-Black, no matter what orgs you've been in, and let's actively practice anti-racism, training young folks and telling them, hey, I'm telling you this because I hated myself until I was 32 years old. And being real with that and giving our children actionable things, because racism doesn't make sense. Hatred, there's never going to be anything that we can ever say that's not going to traumatize our children. But if we can make sure that these macroaggressions that they're experiencing in the world are not the first time they heard them, and that their inner, what's happening outside doesn't match their inner voice, that's your voice as their caregiver and their parent telling them that they don't matter. That was a lot. I'm sorry, but we talk over this thing, and we need to hold ourselves accountable and be aware that racism is a thing. And I want to stop having the conversation about what are we going to do after racism. Let's build what we needed when we were children right now.
Thank you, Ala.
I do want to just echo a bit of what Ala was just saying, in the sense of initially we started up here where we're talking about this big construct of racism, But when you start to drill down, you start to recognize how we are taking part within the system. And in essence, without her actually saying it, what she really did say was, we need to change the system. And the system is us. And the thing about changing the system that we participate in, it's hard because you have to have these hard conversations with yourself. You have to check yourself, check how were you raising your kids? How do you interact and engage with your friends and with your family? But then also, as she did, she dropped this one in there. But I think it was just powerful that she just dropped this little piece and kept going with it, was therapy. And the reason why I think therapy is big is because it gives you a chance to actually have those conversations with yourself. It gives you a chance to actually check yourself. Because again, something else you just dropped in and walked away from was, hating yourself until you're 32. How many of y'all are over the age of 32 in this chat right now? So when we're talking about the damage that takes place, and how long that can last, and the lasting impacts, we're talking about how you are perpetuating a system that you're trying to destroy at the exact same time, which takes us back to Scott's question. So when we're talking about trying to destroy a system, we have to make sure we're getting out of the system first. And once you're able to get out of the system, then you can actually do something about it. And that's a part of the point. As we're going through the system, as we're working through it, trying to find our ways out, as we find our way out, then we can actually do something with it. The problem is that this is such a huge system because it's the foundation of the country. But at the same time, we have to recognize there are certain aspects that we do participate in. There are other aspects that we don't have to participate in. But also being able to just pull out completely, like unplug from the matrix for a little while. So as you're talking about, turning off your cell phone, as you're talking about, stepping away from the computer and actually interacting and engaging with people on an actual personal level. Now, we can do that within ourselves, with our collective group, and that's most of the time that just goes swimmingly well. But we can also use that time to plan how we're going to actually engage with others, because we can't just be a society unto ourselves while in this country. But what we can do is get on the same page, even if it's a case of just you and your family getting on the same page, and then other people you may include into it getting on the same page as you move forward. But again, as I was saying before, I kind of jumped ahead, because at least what I'm talking about anyway, isn't the sort of thing that's going to be done in 2 years. This is a generational shift, but we can start that work now, knowing that when it's time for our kids and their kids, this country can look completely different than the way it does now.
Yes, I think I should jump in at some point and say something. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for including me on this panel. Thank you for inviting me, Brandon. I'm definitely coming at this from the social work perspective. That is what I have my degree in, and that is kind of like the framework of all the work that I do at this point. So I have the privilege to say that I was raised with Black parents who gave me that centeredness. Black parents one of whom was a Jamaican immigrant who came to this country, and the other was a Black Panther. So I was raised with that centeredness and with that consciousness. And so to walk through the world and be around my peers who don't even have the answer to the question, who are you, is something that is very profound. To be someone who walks into a room and understands what it means to be a Black person in the room, but to be a Black woman in the room, to be a Black woman who is an immigrant's daughter in the room, to understand what that all means and be able to carry yourself as such is something that a lot of my peers who are my age do not have. Whether or not they're able to have an education, whether or not they're able to, get out of some of the financial things that a lot of Black people face, if you do not have the answer to that question, who are you? How can you be well? If you don't even know the answer to who are you as a person who walks in this world as a Black person in America in the day and age that we live in. So that's one thing that always resonates with me. And that's one of the things I'm always grateful to my parents. And one of the things I'm going to definitely give to my children, of just that understanding of who are you, and all of that and what that entails. The other thing that I want to touch on a little bit when it comes to the whole wellness and well-being thing is that when we talk about mental health, when we talk about all these helping professions, when we're going through our education, there is very little that we are taught as Black professionals about the traumas that Black and brown people face and how to effectively address those things. Now, as professionals, we are learning these things, we're experiencing them, so we're able to go back and help our communities. But there's very little actually being taught, because all of these institutions that we're being given our education in, they don't care about those things. part of the curriculum routinely. And if they are, they're a very small subset of what we are taught. It's that like diversity chapter, and then we just keep it pushing. Whereas we know like the issues that we're talking about are really impacting Black and brown people disproportionately. When we talk about mental health and we talk about all these diagnoses that we're seeing, they disproportionately affect the Black community. The Black community is also not seeking out these services, but we also have a whole bunch of professionals who are not equipped to address those things in a specific manner. So I think if we're going to talk about wellness and well-being and mental health, we have to also talk about the fact that the systems that we have are not equipped to serve the people that need to be served the most. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Rachel. Yes, everything Rachel said times 5. I want to, something that you said, and I say all the time, and I don't mean offense to like Black social workers if they woke, but social workers are cops just without guns. And it's because of the way they've been, I tend to say socialization instead of education because it's the same thing, but it's because the way they've been socialized into social work, that if a whole community of people are not talked about, but we know that they're the ones that got it really bad, right? And there's all kinds of things, but they're never talked about. That is racism. That is why the foundations and the way that social workers and therapists treat Black and brown people is because that is part of the way they were socialized into it. And for so many people, it took me a long time to find a really good therapist. Because when I was young, I was a young Black girl, and I ain't want to talk to no white lady. I don't care if you only a half a shade lighter than me, you ain't Black. Or darker than me, so you ain't Black. So then it took me years, and then I saw a therapist when I was having postpartum depression, and she basically told me that I was a man. Like, well, and I was like, now I know I just watched a Lifetime story where the lady had all kind of postpartum depression. That's part of the reason why I might have got some of this language. And also I was like really watching that movie, resonating with the actress's emotions and the other things that were going on for that act. And although knowing that this is a dramatization, that's what made me want to reach out. And then so 4 more years went by. I didn't find a good therapist until 2018. And so I'm 36 years old, wanting to go to therapy, wanting to do that. My family's in the medical profession, they're nurses and things, but for me, it just makes sense. Like, go to the doctor. But I couldn't find a good doctor who spoke to or wasn't trying to give me a bunch of pills. Like, I had a doctor, I went to my first appointment and she was like, okay, well, what medicine do you want? And I'm like, I actually don't want any medicine because I just want to talk this through. And I didn't find out I had ADD until 3 years ago. And so never being listened to, all these points of contact and with therapists, but because they were anti-Black, anti-fat girl, anti-queer, and like these are like points of intersection where I'm like, all right, I'm super fat. Let me go talk about why I'm overeating like this. Oh, you're just fat. Like, okay, so let me not. So I think that it's so everything. That's why I was amening and clapping over here on mute, because yes, everything that Rachel said is so true. And then it creates a cognitive dissonance for the people who want to do this work. Yeah, social workers and well, unless you like a doctor, you don't get paid enough. And then if you want to work in the Black and brown community with poor folks because you know that that's what we need, you have to work for a couple of years in that community before they trust you. And so what are you get a lot of doors closed and you're not making enough money. You could barely feed yourself, student loans, Navient calling you all the time. And then you just like, F it, I'm about to go to Brookfield and do this out here and make $15,000 more a year and do less work. Because they have so many resources, not because they don't need it, because everybody needs therapy, but because they already have so many wraparound services in those areas that you literally only have to do your one social work job as opposed to doing this work in New Haven. You're doing social work, you're doing DCF, you're doing homelessness, you're doing medical assistant and therapy and teaching and caregiving. And it's not all right, and it may either subscribe to oppression or disengage from the work altogether and go into other communities that, yes, they need help, but that's the reason why we don't have any folks here that want to do it, because they're beat down. It's beat out of them.
Thank you all for sharing. A lot of main points hit, especially like raising and what Black Lives Matter, and how brown and Black people are being affected. And we hit a lot of important points that leads me up to this next and final question is, according to Mental Health America in 2019, they did a study. They found that 13.4% of the United States population identifies as Black or African American. Of these, over 16% reported having a mental illness in the past year. That is over 7 million people, more people than the populations of Chicago, Houston, and Philadelphia combined. With knowing this fact, how can students and universities support the well-being and work of the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as support brown and Black students at our universities and colleges?
One of the big points, and I'm going to try to keep this as short as I can, but one of the big points is universities from the top down need to make sure that their students know that they actually care about you. It's one thing to be a student and to have your ID number or to have your hoop loop or whatever the case may be, but we get enough lip service as is. But taking those actionable steps that will let the students know we actually care. Now,